The humid, dense air of the Mekong stuck to my skin as soon as I got off the boat. That floating village was a labyrinth of wooden and bamboo houses, a world apart. Adrian, the writer I edited, followed me with that calm of his that sometimes drove me crazy and other times, well, other things. Our house, or rather, our floating platform with rooms, was simple but had a rustic charm. It had a small terrace that opened directly onto the river, a place I sensed would become our refuge and, perhaps, the scene of more than one unsaid confession. We left our suitcases, mine, full of manuscripts and light clothing. Adrian's, I suspect, with more empty notebooks than anything else. His creative process had always been a mystery to me, one that, on this retreat, I was determined to unravel, layer by layer. We spent the first afternoon acclimatizing. The heat was sticky, inviting stillness, slow movements. Adrian took off his shirt, revealing a broad, tanned back. I had to look away, focus on the swaying of the canoes. "Ready to dive into the story?" he asked me with a little smile. He meant his novel, of course. But the way he said it, the glint in his green eyes, made me think of other immersions, much more personal. I nodded, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. We started working on the terrace. The manuscript between us, like a fragile border. His words were powerful, raw at times. I wondered how much of him was in that tormented and seductive protagonist he was creating. Too much, surely. The sun was setting, dyeing the river orange and violet. The silence was only broken by the lapping of water and some distant cricket. Our shoulders almost brushed as I read his corrections. I felt a shiver, despite the heat. "This passage is very intense, Adrian," I commented, pointing to a paragraph where passion overflowed between the lines. He looked at me intently. "Inspiration is everywhere, Elena. You just have to know where to look for it, or with whom." We had dinner at a small floating restaurant, lit by lanterns. The food was exotic, spicy. Every bite seemed to awaken the senses. Adrian told me about his travels, his past muses. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy? No, curiosity. His hand brushed mine as he reached for the water jug. A brief, almost imperceptible contact, but it ignited an electric current between us. I looked up and his eyes held mine, complicit. I knew he had felt it too. Back at our floating house, the silence of the night was dense. The water lapped gently against the stilts. I leaned on the terrace railing, feeling the night breeze. Adrian stood beside me, so close I could smell his woody cologne. "This place has something, doesn't it?" he whispered. His voice was deep, almost a murmur that gave me goosebumps. "Something that traps you, that makes you forget the rest." What did he mean by the rest? His life in the city? Some woman waiting? I turned to look at him. The moon illuminated his features, accentuating the shadows under his cheekbones. There was a vulnerability in his expression I had never seen before. And a desire that mirrored my own, growing in the darkness. The following days passed in a haze of intense work and palpable tension. We discussed characters and plots, but every conversation seemed to have a double meaning, a subtext that only we understood. The line between editor and something more was blurring. One morning, we decided to take a break and explore the narrower canals in a small rowboat. The sun filtered through the palm leaves, creating plays of light and shadow on the water. Adrian rowed skillfully, his muscles tensing with the effort. He splashed me with an oar, accidentally? He smiled, and I knew it wasn't. I splashed him back, laughing. For a moment, we forgot the manuscripts, the deadlines, the professionalism. We were just two people, playing under the Mekong sun. We found a small hidden cove, a haven of peace. The water was crystal clear. Adrian suggested a swim. I hesitated. I was wearing a light dress, no swimsuit. He seemed to read my mind. "No one will see us," he said, his voice a complicit whisper. He took off his shirt and shorts with astonishing naturalness, leaving him in swim trunks. His body was more athletic than I imagined under his rider's clothes. He dived in, and the cool water seemed to stoke the fire I felt inside. "The water is amazing, Elena. Aren't you coming?" His invitation hung in the air, laden with possibilities. I looked at my dress, then at him, his wet hair stuck to his forehead, his eyes shining. Temptation was a sweet, dangerous melody. Finally, I gave in. I slipped the dress over my head, left in my underwear. It wasn't ideal, but the promise of the cool water and his company were too strong. I felt his gaze travel over my body, slow, appreciative. I didn't feel exposed, but desired. The water enveloped us, a cool, silky embrace. We swam, played, laughed. For an instant, the barrier between us dissolved completely. His hand brushed my leg underwater, a touch that could have been accidental, but we both knew it wasn't. We got out of the water refreshed, but with a new layer of tension between us. The sun dried our improvised swimwear on our skin, marking every curve, every muscle. We avoided looking directly at each other, but the awareness of the other was overwhelming. That night, working on the manuscript was different. The love scenes Adrian had written took on a new dimension. I read his words and felt like he was whispering them in my ear, describing longings we both secretly shared. "Do you think it's believable?" he asked, referring to a particularly fiery encounter between his protagonists. "Too much," I replied breathlessly, my gaze locked on his. The word floated between us, laden with implications. A tropical storm broke out one afternoon, trapping us inside the house. The sound of torrential rain on the palm roof was deafening, isolating us further from the world. The atmosphere became intimate, almost claustrophobic. Adrian lit some candles, as the power had gone out. Shadows danced on the walls, creating a game of mystery and seduction. He offered me some of the whiskey he kept for creative emergencies. I accepted, needing something to calm my nerves. The liquor warmed my throat and relaxed my inhibitions, or perhaps fueled them. We talked for hours, not about work, but about ourselves. About broken dreams, hidden longings. I had never felt so exposed, so understood by someone. At one point, his hand sought mine across the table. This time it wasn't an accidental brush. His fingers intertwined with mine, firm, warm. A simple gesture that said everything. I looked up and saw in his eyes the same storm that raged outside. He leaned towards me slowly, his face inches from mine. I could feel his breath, smelling of whiskey and desire. My heart was racing, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Was this what I had come to the Mekong to find? "Elena," his voice was a hoarse whisper. I closed my eyes, waiting. The world narrowed to that instant, to the promise of his lips. But then, a louder thunderclap than before startled us, breaking the spell. Or perhaps, giving us one last chance for sanity. We pulled apart abruptly, the tension still vibrating in the air. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a nervous smile on his lips. "Quite a storm," he said, trying to lighten the mood. But we both knew the real storm was inside us. After that, something changed. Familiarity was tinged with a caution laden with desire. Every brush was more significant, every gaze deeper. Work continued, but beneath the surface, the current of the unsaid was pulling us along. One day, Adrian received a letter. He read it with a frown, and a shadow crossed his face. "News from home," he said curtly. I didn't ask, but the word home resonated in my head, reminding me there was a world, and perhaps a life, beyond our floating refuge. His mood changed after the letter. He was more distant, more absorbed in his thoughts. I tried to get something out of him, but he clammed up. Was it his wife? Problems? The uncertainty was a thorn in my side. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Adrian, what's wrong? I asked him directly as we watched the stars from the terrace. He sighed, a sound heavy with weight. It's complicated, Elena. A writer's life isn't always as idyllic as this place. Sometimes, he continued, his voice low, one makes decisions, builds a life, and then realizes that maybe it wasn't the one they wanted. Or that there are things, people, that make you question everything. His gaze met mine in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat. Was he talking about me? About us? Or were they just the ramblings of a tormented writer? I wanted to ask him, I needed to know, but the fear of the answer paralyzed me. He moved closer, and for a moment I thought he was going to kiss me. That we would finally cross that invisible line that separated and united us at the same time. He placed a hand on my cheek, his thumb caressing my skin. A tender, almost painful gesture. You are special, Elena, he said, and in his voice, there was a sincerity that disarmed me. This time with you has been a breath of fresh air. Something I didn't know I needed. But there was no kiss. Only that confession, suspended in the tropical night. The last days of the retreat were bittersweet. The manuscript was almost ready, a professional triumph. But the personal tension between us was a tight knot in my stomach. We knew the end of our bubble was approaching. We decided to celebrate the completion of the book with a special dinner on our terrace. We cooked together, or rather, he cooked and I watched, enjoying his concentration, the way his hands moved with precision. The food was delicious, the wine too. We talked about everything and nothing, avoiding the topic of our imminent departure. But it was there, floating between us like a ghost. The last night. After dinner, we sat in silence, watching the river. The full moon painted a silver path on the water. Adrian took my hand, this time without hesitation. His fingers clung to mine as if he never wanted to let go. I don't want this to end, Elena, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. I turned to him, my heart aching. Me neither, Adrian. The words came out on their own, sincere, painful. And then, he kissed me. It wasn't a stolen or tentative kiss. It was a deep, desperate kiss, laden with all the unspoken words, all the desires repressed for weeks. A kiss that tasted of farewell and unfulfilled promise. We clung to each other, like castaways in a storm. His hands roamed my back, my waist, pulling me closer to him. My fingers tangled in his hair, anchoring me to that moment, to that feeling of fullness and pain. I don't know how long we were like that. The outside world disappeared. Only the two of us existed, the moon and the river as silent witnesses to our forbidden encounter. Every caress, every touch, was a farewell and a welcome at the same time. When we separated, we were breathless, our eyes shining with unshed tears. We said nothing. What could be said? Words would be superfluous, impoverishing the intensity of what had just happened. That night I didn't sleep in my room. Nor did Adrian in his. There were no more words, only the eloquence of bodies seeking solace, seeking a connection that transcended logic and conventions. It was a night of whispers and skin against skin. Dawn found us embraced, light filtering through the bamboo cracks. There was a palpable sadness in the air, the awareness that the dream was coming to an end. But also a strange peace, that of having lived something intensely real. The farewell at the pier was brief, almost formal. A handshake that lasted a second longer than necessary. A look that said everything and nothing. Thank you for everything, Elena. Thank you, Adrian. I watched him go away on the boat, his figure getting smaller until it disappeared into the river mist. I stayed there, feeling the emptiness his absence left, and the echo of his kisses on my lips. I returned to the city, to my life. Adrian's book was a success. Our professional relationship continued, efficient, distant. But sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I returned to the Mekong, to that floating village, to his arms. We never spoke of what happened. It was our secret, kept in the heart of the Delta. A forbidden chapter in the story of our lives. Infidelity? Perhaps. Romantic adventure? Definitely. Something to regret? Never. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers too. If the scent of jasmine or the sound of water transports him to our terrace, to our nights of whispers. I like to think so, that a part of him stayed with me in the Mekong. Life went on, with its ups and downs. There were other loves, other stories. But none had the exotic magic, the lustful tension of those days floating in a lost paradise, with a writer with green eyes and words that burned. That creative retreat was much more than that. It was an awakening of the senses, an exploration of boundaries. And although our story remained unfinished, like a novel without an epilogue, its memory remains alive, vibrant, like the Delta itself. The heat of the Mekong wasn't just climatic, it was an internal fever that Adrian and I shared. Every brush of hands when passing manuscript pages was a small shock, a spark threatening to ignite the jungle of our desires. I remember one afternoon, he was reading aloud a passage from his novel, a particularly intimate one. His deep, melodic voice filled the small living room of the floating house. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt every word like a direct caress on my skin. His characters loved each other with a desperation that mirrored ours. Was he aware of what he was writing? Or was it his subconscious screaming what his mouth kept silent? I shivered to think that I might be the muse for those burning lines. The nights were the hardest. The sound of the water, the insects, the thin wall separating our rooms. I imagined his movements, his breathing. Sometimes, I thought I heard him sigh, and I wondered if he thought of me too. Once, I tripped on the slippery deck and he caught me by the waist to prevent me from falling into the water. His firm hands, his body so close to mine. The contact was brief, but enough to leave me breathless and with a racing pulse. "Careful," he said, his voice a little hoarse. Our eyes met, and for a second, the world stopped. Then, he released me slowly, as if it were difficult for him to do so. I could only nod, unable to articulate a word. There were moments when professionalism prevailed, and we were just writer and editor, debating commas and plot twists. But even then, the undercurrent of attraction was present, vibrating beneath the surface of our words. The Mekong Delta, with its exotic beauty and oppressive atmosphere, became the perfect catalyst for our feelings. It was as if the place itself was pushing us towards each other, conspiring for us to surrender our defenses. Adrian sometimes spoke to me about his other life, but always vaguely, elliptically. He mentioned a large house, a garden. Never a wife, nor children. But I sensed there was something, or someone, tying him to that other side. And that was the part that hurt, the one that turned our attraction into something forbidden, dangerous. If he wasn't free, what were we doing? Playing with fire in inflammable paradise? The answer was yes, and we both knew it. That final kiss, on the last night, wasn't just a kiss. It was a pact, a surrender. It was the culmination of weeks of furtive glances, accidental brushes, words with double meanings. It was the contained explosion. And afterwards, silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that follows a profound revelation. We looked at each other, and in our eyes was a mixture of triumph and defeat. We had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. The night we spent together was a parenthesis in time, A parallel universe where only the present, touch, shared breath existed. There were no promises, no plans. Only the raw, beautiful truth of our bodies meeting. When I left the Mekong, a part of me stayed there, floating in its murky, seductive waters. And a part of Adrian, I know, came with me, hidden between the pages of his novel and the memories on my skin. His book, Shadows in the Delta, had my name in the dedication, just for the light in the darkness. No one else understood the meaning, but I did. Every time I open it, the scent of the Mekong seems to emanate from its pages. Sometimes, when the city suffocates me, I close my eyes and return to that floating terrace, to the humid heat, to Adrian's gaze. And I wonder what would have happened if we had dared more, if we had fought for that improbable love. But some stories are more beautiful precisely because they are fleeting, because they remain etched like a perfect, unattainable dream. Ours was like that, an instant of magic in an exotic corner of the world, a secret between a writer and his editor. And although I know I should NT, I sometimes reread his emails, searching between the lines for some hint, some sign. But I only find professionalism. Perhaps, as in his novels, the most important thing is what is not said, what remains vibrating in the air.